Joining us now with reactions, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham. Senator, with all due respect, you rightly said if there's no due process, it's dead on arrival in the Senate. I would think the Senate, led by Republicans, is not going to put their seal of approval on something as corrupt as this.
I think it would be a danger to the presidency in the future for us to legitimize what's going on in the House. There's no civil proceeding in America, no criminal proceeding in America that denies a person to tell their side of the story by calling witnesses except in the House. And every American deserves the right to confront their accuser. That's not being done in this case. So I don't want to legitimize this because it's a threat to the presidency. Then there's the allegation. The allegation is that Donald J. Trump withheld aid to the Ukraine unless the Ukrainian government investigated Joe Biden and Hunter Biden for corruption. The problem with that allegation is it's not true. The aid was delivered to the Ukrainian government, and there was no investigation of Hunter Biden or Joe Biden. How long does it take to dispose of that?
Let me ask you, because, again, the due process, you were part of impeachment in 1998.
Yeah, I've done this before.
This is not your first rodeo, Senator. You're aging yourself.
That's right.
I was on the air, too. Okay, guilty. But every consideration that was given Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton's lawyers, the minority party, are all denied here, because at the end of the paragraph, it all says the same thing. It goes, yeah, at the discretion of the chairman, he said he wanted the whistleblower. Republicans gave a list. They said no to every Republican witness, and now they're cherry-picking the two witnesses that they think will be most favorable to them and ignoring all the ones that destroyed their narrative. Who in the Senate, what committee in the Senate could call witnesses and investigate Hunter and Joe, because I identified the laws that I believe Joe Biden broke?
Well, the allegation against Hunter Biden is that he had a conflict of interest by serving on the board, and that Joe Biden weighed in to have the prosecutor fired because he's getting close to his son. There's State Department activity talking about the conflict of interest, and there is a reasonable investigation to be done here. The Foreign Relations Committee has jurisdiction over the State Department. But let me get back to the point you just made. What's happening in the House is basically un-American. No American, including Donald Trump, should be accused of misdeeds without confronting their accuser, which is the whistleblower. And no American should be denied the ability to tell their side of the story by calling witnesses to explain their defense. That's being denied the President of the United States. To every American who's going to watch tomorrow, this could not happen in your case. This couldn't happen in a parking ticket case. This couldn't happen in any civil matter in America, because due process requires the ability of every American to call witnesses on their behalf, except for President Trump. So why am I not going to watch this hearing tomorrow? Because I think it is a threat to the presidency. I don't want to legitimize it. It's un-American. It denies the basics of due process.
Why won't the Senate now? They have the ability to investigate. Listen, Joe Biden is bragging on tape about giving you, either fire this prosecutor in 6 hours. If you fire him, I'll give you $1 billion taxpayer dollars. You don't fire the prosecutor that's investigating my zero experience son who's being paid millions, I'm taking the money back with me. Now, that to me looks like a crime. So why isn't the Senate, now that we know that that all happened, investigating? For example, who would you like to be called in as witnesses, and what committee in the Senate could call them in?
Well, the Foreign Relations Committee has jurisdiction over foreign aid, the State Department. We're talking about Joe Biden said you're not going to get a penny unless you fire the prosecutor. Here's the question. After John Solomon's FOIA request, is there a reasonable belief that Joe Biden intervened not because the prosecutor was corrupt, because he's getting close to his son? The paper trail suggests there is a reasonable belief, or at least something to look at here. So I'm hoping that Chairman Risch will look into whether or not there was a conflict of interest identified by the State Department regarding Hunter Biden being on this gas board, and whether or not Joe Biden intervened after the raid.
Can the Senate call in the hearsay whistleblower and put that person under oath? Should the Senate also call in Adam Schiff's staff for whatever contact they had? And should they call in Joe and Hunter Biden? And why isn't this happening simultaneously so the American people can see both sides of this and see where the real corruption lies?
The whistleblower is under the jurisdiction of the Intel Committee. All things about Hunter Biden are in the jurisdiction of the Foreign Relations Committee. And if I were Chairman Risch, I would call the State Department officials in who expressed concerns about a conflict of interest with Hunter Biden and see where that takes you.
Can you maybe talk to your colleagues in the Senate and make that happen?
Well, the first thing I want my colleagues in the Senate to do is step up and say what's going on in the House is unfair, un-American, we're not going to bless it. And I'd like my colleagues in the Senate to say there is no quid pro quo here because the money was given to the Ukraine and Hunter Biden and Joe Biden were not investigated. I'd like Republicans to speak up and say this is a bunch of garbage.
And by the way, the president has a duty to faithfully execute the laws on both issues. There were laws that were broken, and they never mentioned any aid money, did they?
Not
a
one
penny.
penny. Not
one penny.
And they got
right,
the money.
The circus is coming to town. Buckle up. Thank you, Senator. When we come